technology, strategy, and leadership, it's always been of interest to me. And with what's happening now in the world, it just becomes, at least in my tiny world, it becomes so incredibly or exponentially more interesting just to talk about it, saying, well, what does this mean to the leader who was just let go and they're 45 years old and they're worried about being left behind? And sure, I mean, this has to be part of that conversation in terms of where they go with, what we spend 8, 12, 16 hours a day doing.
Welcome back to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. I'm your host today, Carrie Purcell, and today I'm joined by Tom Mawhinney. Tom is a best-selling author, an executive coach and consultant, a board director, and an entrepreneur. And I first connected with Tom through his recently co-authored book, The AI Revolution. I'm going to show you the cover for those of you joining us on YouTube. So the AI Revolution, Thriving Within Civilization's Next Big Disruption. An absolutely enormous topic that I know so many people are interested in. This was actually co-authored by 34 authors. Tom is one of them. I'm also one of them, which is how I connected with him. But his chapter is specifically on leading with vision and confidence. So navigating an AI-driven future. Tom, I'm so glad to see you today. Welcome to the show.
So happy to be here and appreciate the invite, Carrie.
Wonderful. And I know we chatted briefly, so you're joining us from Calgary, Canada today. That's right?
Mm-hmm. Mountain time.
Mountain time. I'm in Toronto, of course, but both AudioLife and the authors on AI Revolution are global. So we have people joining from all over. But it's nice to have a Canadian on with me.
Hey, that's about the extent that I can have my Canadiana.
Good. Well, I can tell you I really enjoyed reading your chapter. So I hope that everybody listening, if they haven't had a chance, does get to go back and read it. I'm going to ask you some questions from the book. I'm going to ask you some questions from your background, from your career.
Sure.
But let me start with the book and just ask you that really short, that 60-second version. What's your chapter about?
Yeah, and not to cover the entire book and its premise, but the general aspect of that is obviously around artificial intelligence, and there's many nuances to that. Where my chapter focuses is, and I think you did a great job introing it, thank you for that, is really around that connection with leadership. Where do leaders have to go with this? Do they embrace it? Do they run from it? How can they show up representing so that it becomes more mainstream than it already is and is going to be? And I think that's the premise of the book, is this isn't one of those latest fads. I think most listeners are going to grasp that. From a leadership perspective, which tends to add a few more years to the clock for most of us, maybe not quite as readily accepted as being part of everything. So my chapter is definitely talking about, hey, here are the different approaches you can take. Maybe a suggestion of what the best way to go about that is from my experience. And being a bit of a tech geek on the side, I mean, I've been around this for a long time. So, I think there's some credibility there based on toe stubbing and working with all kinds of different leaders along the way, and especially of late. And a matter of fact, I'm sure we'll get into this, but I've spent a lot of time talking about leadership and really the way the world has changed. Technology is a huge part of that. Artificial intelligence, obviously a driver of that aspect too, but lots of things for leaders to try to catch up on is kind of the premise of that chapter.
Absolutely. Great introduction. Thank you for that. Such a big, important topic. We will dig into a little bit more about the chapter, but also the background that led you to, to be in a position to speak on this. I also want to note this is not your first book. So you wrote The Contemporary Leader, The Modern Skills Required to Lead, Adapt, and Success in Today's Marketplace, which is actually a series. So I can see on your website and also on Amazon that it includes the Contemporary Board Member, the Contemporary Executive, and the Contemporary Entrepreneur. And I have to believe this is all driven from your background, your experience, and of course the expertise that you've developed from that. So can you share a little bit about your background and how you developed this this expertise, this thought leadership?
Yeah, and I like to say with a smile on my face that I'm older than I look, but maybe that's not the case anymore. So the reason I bring that up is I've been around the block a few times. So I've been fortunate to be in a position where I've been an entrepreneur. I've been in multiple positions as an executive. I've sat on boards. And what we know about all of those roles for certain is aspects like technology are different for each and every one of them in terms of their application and the level of understanding you have to have of them. So my point on that is, and how I got to writing this book called The Contemporary Leader, is the world obviously is evolving very quickly. It's not just technology, although that's a big part of it. There's other elements of expectations in the workforce and globalization, and all these things that most of us are familiar with at least a cursory level. But the impact that has on leaders and the way they need to adjust and evolve is pretty significant. I could make the argument that I think leadership in general is falling a little bit behind the curve, hence the reason of putting together a thought leadership-based book called The Contemporary Leader, which I won't go into the heavy detail here other than to say it really talks about 15 specific skills that fall into 3 domains that I think are most relevant to leaders today. And that is professional skills. We'll all be familiar with those in terms of visioning and translation and motivation, those aspects. Personal skills, which I do think a lot of leaders maybe rank as secondary when it comes to that whole emotional intelligence and coaching and those pieces, which are more in demand and expected by the workplace today. And then, of course, technology skills, which I say with a big smile, because I can tell you from having worked with, let's just say, a lot of different leaders, I find there's a lot of deferral from the more senior leader, the more deferral there is going, I have people for that. And it's very difficult nowadays to distinguish when you're developing strategy, as many senior executives do, between technology's impact, potential impact, and its absolute influence now, especially with the fact that I don't think there's a strategy you can deploy that doesn't have a significantly different look to it based on the technology, not just artificial intelligence, but the things that have changed in the last 5 years alone just demand that we get a little deeper. I'm not suggesting we have to be in depth on everything, because that is why there are experts. But you must have the ability to at least understand how it might be applied as a leader. And whether you're a board member responsible for governance and really a sounding board and a check on the CEO and the rest of the executive team as part of that organization, obviously executives direct, and even entrepreneurs. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs are in the tech space already, but if they're not, there's just so many different ways of going about starting and growing a business now than there was even 3 years ago. And I think everyone appreciates that. So the idea of the book series, long-winded way of getting back to what you said, was the foundation book, The Contemporary Leader, and talking about these skills, which has taken me a few years to pull together and saying, yes, I think these are the specific skills I'd at least like to see more leaders evolve, is you needed application, I think, specific to the stakeholder. And that's why the other 3 books that you referenced, which I would call companion books, not especially long, and they really build on the premise that you've got some idea of what the contemporary leader was about, although it does reference the skills again in each book, but it makes it applicable, right, to a board member, to an executive, to an entrepreneur. And in fact, there's in each one of those books, there is a evolving case study for a board member that walks through the chapter saying, here's the challenges they're facing, or they finally recognized they were facing. And this isn't providing the answers as much as it is a framework for how you might think of approaching when you come to the realization that you need to continue to evolve your skills in order to stay on pace. And that's applicable to those 3 stakeholders. So yeah, it's an exciting time. And for me anyways, as someone who's done a lot of thought leadership articles, LinkedIn and otherwise, finally getting to the point where we're saying, I think there is certainly an interest in seeing this pulled together more comprehensively, specific to leadership skills. Although I do note that, skills are fairly irrelevant on their own. It's really the combination of different skills that build competencies that allow us to face these challenges that are very much the reality now in the modern world. And there's just so many of them. The expectations on leaders are so much higher now, in my opinion, than it was even a couple of years ago. And I don't know that realization is there, but I think it will be the difference between success and truly those that stand out and are able to, continue to experience a lot of wonderful things as a leader that, this world is creating a path for.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you for that. There was a lot there. I'm going to pick up on different pieces of it throughout our conversation. So I will say, that the AI Revolution chapter, I appreciated how you put in anecdotes. So when you reference it, you have case studies that draw it together and make it really applicable to people. I can see that in your writing, and I really appreciate that. So your Contemporary Leader series, it's got the core book that really details those 15 skill areas. And then you've got the 3 companion books that help to personalize it based on your role.
Exactly.
And really, they would go together well. A lot of the time our listeners like to know, they hear these accomplished people that are authors, that are CEOs, that have done great things in their careers, and they want to know how you got there. How did you? So tell us a little bit about your professional roots. I mean, you mentioned entrepreneurship. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about, but tell us a little bit about your professional background and maybe that career path.
Yeah, and without going back to the womb, I can certainly tell you that it was.
You can. I have a little extra time if you want.
This may or not resonate with some of the listeners, but I was an old soul pretty young, and what I mean by that is it allowed me to focus, just saying, here's what I think I'm really interested in, and it came down to 3 things. Even in my early 20s, certainly technology, which is where I started my career. Companies like IBM and Digital Equipment and Computer Associates. And this is back to, technology, as most may not know it that are listening to this, but certainly had that flavor the entire way through my career. But as I got a little more seasoned and opportunities open up themselves for me in terms of career, I got an opportunity to get into leadership. And through leadership, an opportunity to define strategy. So it's those 3 elements of technology, leadership, and strategy have always, in some combination, been fascinating to me. And eventually, and over time, through lots of hard knocks, we all learn our lessons, right? I enjoy the coaching part, the teaching part of it, and just the giving back piece. If that sounds cliche, my apologies, but I really do love having conversations with folks that are really trying to get their head around one or more of those 3 principles of technology, leadership, and the strategy side of things. And I've been incredibly fortunate to do them all in different capacities, like you alluded to before. Sitting on boards, sitting in even as a CEO and other C-level type opportunities, and certainly as an entrepreneur, which you alluded to before. I've started a handful of companies as well, usually with the intent of trying to do what I do and what I love more than it is trying to build something to scale and selling it for a windfall. And that's not to suggest that's not important. It just, for me, has been, I'm way more interested in the value I get out of a conversation and progress that conversation leads to than I am about something that I could scale and turn over to somebody else. And in fact, pretty much every executive chair that I've sat in came from a consulting engagement, which came from one of the organizations that I had launched as an entrepreneur.
Got it. That can be a strong connection, especially if you've been a valued, trusted partner. I totally get that. Also that, I can relate on, in my background, having that strong technology piece. So I'm going to ask you a question, which it might be a similar path for you. And I just want to know, when was that turning point that led you to AI, where AI became kind of a more core aspect of the technology piece as one of your focuses?
I wouldn't hide from the fact that all of us got a lot more interested in AI beyond the movies that we've seen over the past few years. As soon as Gen AI and ChatGPT all came out, maybe a little bit before that, I have maintained an interest in emerging technologies for a long time, even to the extent where I continue to do development of my own. There are obviously places like MIT, you can do courses online around artificial intelligence, and I've done a handful of those. There is even one more, what I'll call more comprehensive, Singularity University. Some of the listeners might be familiar with that. It's not a trivial investment, but I would tell you the value from it. If you're interested in not just the idea of technology, but how it can impact every facet of life, was just a phenomenal experience for me. And that's a couple of years ago now. So, when does one get interested in artificial intelligence? I think that really comes to when they think it can be applicable in their world, because otherwise we say that's for somebody else and isn't that cool, but we still do things the way we do. I think we're all arguing now, or at least trying to make that argument, that with generative AI and whichever tool you use, ChatGPT or otherwise, it is providing productivity gains, insights, just more expeditious results, which allow us to do other things, not to replace us, but more to allow us to do the things that we can continue to add value to, that I really, even being somewhat vested in this, don't think, the technology is going to replace from a human standpoint for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you do open your chapter. I'll actually just read the the quote that you put at the beginning. So you put, AI won't replace humans, but those who use AI will replace those who don't. A quote from Gary Kasparov. And, it's a really, really good framework for what you continue to talk through in your chapter, just to let people know that there is a role for the human, but there is a big role for AI as well. So let's dig into some of that a little bit. I think people are afraid, and actually one more quote from your chapter. So you say, fear less, learn more. I think that's actually near the end of your chapter. That's sort of a culminating point that you bring home pretty strongly. As humans delegate more to AI, what is and we can take this, I want to start in the workplace, but we can take this into the personal realm as well. So as we delegate more to AI, what is the human advantage? What are we bringing that can't be replaced by AI, that can give us the confidence to not be feared, to know that we're better with AI, not to run away from it? Many things that you do talk about in your chapter.
Yeah, the human advantage, in my opinion. Now, there's going to be some AI experts listening to this that are going to say, hey, Tom, this is what you're alluding to is almost here anyways. And sure, there's no doubt that the judgment piece that I will point to, which again sounds pretty cliche, is truly between that and empathy. And I don't think we should overlook the value of empathy, because if I was true to what I just wrote about in the other book, it is as much the rounded skill set that allow humans to make decisions that something entirely logical like a machine cannot yet do today. And I think that is still a ways away. So when it comes to the fear, just getting back to the quote that you pulled, you have a choice, right? You can be a laggard, fast follower, whatever in that adoption curve you want to reference as an organization and as a leader. It isn't going away. There's an opportunity here not to treat AI and some of the other technologies as just a cost cutter. It does open up more of what your organization does well, because what I can pretty much promise any CEO, he or he wants to have this debate, is that, look, you have probably 60% of what is done in your workplace can be routinized, maybe is to some extent. We should be taking advantage of that. But what that should free up are cycles for a lot of those people, albeit they're probably going to have to add some additional training, especially as they're more junior in the organization, to focus on the things that, again, I don't think machines are going to be doing anytime soon. So my point in all of that is look, I think a lot of executives are fearing it, one, because they don't understand it and are a little worried they're not going to understand it. But the second is, even if they do, they're worried about bringing it to the organization, because most people, they believe, and there's probably some truth to it, are going to react saying, that's your nice way of saying you're going to cut a lot of people.
Yes,
and it doesn't have to be that way. Matter of fact, I could make the argument, if you're an organization based on growth, it's not that way at all, right? You just have to look at jobs as they are today and be able to dissect them, not to the level of granularity that everyone thinks it's going to take years to do, but just embrace the things that could be done more quickly by machine learning based systems, right? And then just have those individuals focus and develop their skills around the things that are going to be needed to differentiate that organization. Because AI is available to everyone, regardless of industry. If you're priming that as your advantage, I would say that's a mistake. I think it becomes table stakes pretty quickly. And in fact, that's where more in this future thought leadership, in my mind, that I intend to put to paper will be based on. Competitive advantage isn't going to be acknowledging that you understand and are leveraging artificial intelligence. That's going to be expected. Where you use it and how that frees up the skills that only we as humans have, at least in today's world, is going to be the true advantage. And that, I think, is something that executives seem to smile and nod a lot when I say, but more often than not, maybe they go back to the safety nets of doing what they do and are really more concerned now about how their board or how their advisors or how even their employees are going to react if they start saying, we're going to start leveraging more of this.
Yes. Great answer. Thank you for that. I love the focus on growth, right? So let's look at, I've always thought about if you had 20% more time, what would you do with it, right? And I think everybody has an answer for that. So what if AI can give you 20% more time? And I think these days we're projecting a lot more than 20% more time. So it doesn't need to be that fear of job loss. It's how can we grow? How can our organizations grow? What can we do in our individual roles? And to your point, training and upskilling may be a big part of that. And that's important that we take into consideration. I also, did you want to jump on that?
No, I was just going to reemphasize that point, though, that I think gets lost is that's part of the fear piece is people that are, say, middle-level managers and that are moving upwards in their career are a little fearful that saying, hey, I got to this point because I knew X. And what I think they should be doing, and this has nothing to do with all being about senior executives either, it's more just recognize where your profession and your interest is going and what things can probably be more readily done, and start that process now. Develop your own skills. Like, don't wait necessarily for the organization to identify that for you. It's so readily available now. And it doesn't matter how you choose to do it, self-paced or otherwise. There's so many platforms where you can go and do bite-sized pieces of education, and you'll see a lot, whether you're on Instagram, you're on all these things. Once it gets a feel for the fact you're interested in that, it's going to give you a host of platforms. And I'm not saying invest in them all, but it is amazing how many people are stalled. And I'm just fascinated at just the limited uptake on those things that I thought people would jump on even more quickly. And that's why I think you start seeing more of these organizations coming forward saying, well, try ours then. But it doesn't change the fact we have to keep learning. Technology is now the most significant root of that, I would argue. And the tools available to do it are just, regardless of your learning type and your personality, it's there for you. And I just hope people do that without just saying, well, you're telling me I have to invest 20 hours a week. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's fun ways of investing 30 minutes every second day, and amazing how much more insight that gives you. And I would say direction it gives you in terms of where you want to go with your career and the skills you need to develop.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent advice. Applies in so many situations, whether you're within an organization that is or isn't thinking about AI, whether you're outside of an organization looking at what's next, whether you're a leader thinking about, all of the people that are facing fear and maybe being held back by it right now. I also like your point earlier that this isn't something to wait for. This is let's consider it table stakes. If you think it's your advantage, it's going to be everybody's advantage. And that brings us back to, again, what is that human advantage? You pointed out both in our conversation and in your chapter, vision. So for what humans are going to bring, that human element is vision, empathy, creativity. You talked just now about judgment. And we know today, even as you're using AI, accountability is on the human, right? That is it is not foolproof. It is full of hallucinations. It can polish a really bad idea into something that sounds wonderful, but just wasn't a good idea, right? And that human judgment, that human accountability is an incredibly important part of our role, particularly now.
Yeah, and I almost want to apologize for glossing over that, because that is an outstanding point around the ethical side of AI, and maybe I'm using that too broadly, but there is, without a doubt, in my mind anyways, it's coming very quickly, the ability for, let's just say, competitors to falsely emulate some of their competitors through videos, through avatars, that will be impossible to discern and distinguish between. I think we all know that to some extent. I don't know that everyone's embraced just how prevalent I think this will become. The harder role for, let's just say, bad people today is cybersecurity, and those things will continue to be. That requires an incredible depth of skill. The ability to now leverage AI and the tools available to have a CEO say a certain thing that is going to hurt the reputation of an organization, as an example, there are tens of thousands of people that could do that in an hour with the tools that are there. I personally have a AI-driven video avatar, and it's getting increasingly difficult to distinguish between me and that avatar, although it's based on a recording that I did. But once it's available and posted anywhere, I can have a lot of people posting things that I am apparently saying that I don't believe in, and it's going to be tough to manage that. So long way around to get back to this whole, the ethical, the judgment side is really what I was getting to partly with that is we're going to have to be really careful, but that doesn't mean we don't use it because of that. Because even if we don't, someone else is going to, and they will, to get us out of the way or provoke an advantage, even though that's probably not the best way to do it, certainly not the most ethical, it will happen. And so I think all of us are in a better position if we kind of understand it. And, you take those precautions to make sure you're as protected as you can be, with the reality that it's so sophisticated now. including on the cyber side, which is all part of emerging tech as well, that we can only do what we can do about being prepared. At the end of the day, we're still trying to create a distinct value proposition for whatever organization we're in, not for profit or otherwise. And that's our value. We just need to make sure we're just not completely letting the outside world submarine those efforts because we had no inkling of the technologies that make it pretty easy for them to do that.
Really well put, and an important warning, but also call to action to use your judgment to be a part of what is going to happen anyway, but to play a role in shaping how that's going to happen. I want to pull us back to a big focus in your chapter, in your experience, and also in the other books that you've published. So back to leadership. What would you say are the key leaderships that are going to be required to lead in the AI revolution?
Yeah, well, this is an easy plug from the other book that I wrote in parallel, right? So, I think there's three aspects to it at a high level. I think there's technology awareness. So, you and I have been going back and forth in that. There's a base level of understanding and awareness of what's going on so that you're not caught scratching your head when people are talking about relatively mainstream references to tech. ChatGPT would be example, some of the other Gen AI, those aspects. That's awareness. There's technology objectivity, as I refer to it, which maybe sounds a little clunky or marketing, but what it really is alluding to, especially for executives who make the decisions on what technologies to buy and implement and which ones not to, is a lot of time there's just preferential. We've always used X as a vendor, so we're always going to use them. And it can get organizations in a place where maybe they're not embracing the most applicable for their business. I'm not going to mention vendor names. It wouldn't be fair for me to do that, but I'm sure people can speculate. I will say this much back in the day, because I worked for IBM, that's a long time ago. It used to be executives would say, well, you can't get fired for hiring IBM. There's a lot of that now on the technology side. Well, hey, I was on a plane as an executive on the inside flap of the Air Canada magazine, Canadiana there for you. It said, hey, big advertisement from a specific vendor, therefore they have to be the ones, and I'm safer to do that. That is not objective. Objective is related to what's best, obviously, for your organization, and remaining an open mind, because things are evolving so quickly. It isn't always the biggest names, not always the biggest names, that are the ones to leverage into, because you're not always talking about massive platforms as much as you're talking about things that are most applicable to your business. So that's the objectivity side. Not surprisingly, the third one is the actual technology application. And what I mean by that, and again, let's focus on executives or board members, they're actually not going to be doing the application of it, but they do have to understand the translation from awareness into application. In other words, can we see this tool that we're talking about that's AI driven being applied, implemented in our organization, and see the advantage it would bring us? And that's the whole idea of, you need to understand how it could be applied, not actually do the application, because there's wonderful people to do that. Data scientists and people that are experts in it. I do not profess that any leader for that matter has to be in that position. They can be if that's what really keeps them going as far as their career goes. But I think others just need to embrace the fact that I have to have some understanding now, more than I did even 24 months ago, how this technology can actually be applied to our business. Because as a senior leader, I should have theoretically the best understanding of all the moving parts in the business. And therefore, knowing how to prioritize, back to the judgment piece, I think is key. So that's how I summarize it. It's a bit of a cheat because I'm quoting directly from the book that I wrote. But that, I think, is the value for people is, don't overly complicate a skill set or what you need to do. Just appreciate these. That's how these things fit together. And as a decision maker, as an entrepreneur, an executive, board member, an aspiring leader, you're going to have to understand more than just the, as we used to call, feeds and speeds of something, right? You need to understand, so what? So what does that mean? And more importantly, now I would argue, is which decision do we make? Because you have so many around technology. Do we go this way, that way, the other way? Which one is going to give us or get us closer to the objectives and goals that we set out for the organization?
Excellent. Yeah, I know you've had time to think about it, to experience it, to write it, but really well put. I hear the executive coach. I hear the board member, that corporate governance piece in you as you're saying it. Very, very clear, very well weighted and logical.
And now for a word from our sponsors. Ready to share your stories and life philosophy? Or capture those of a parent or grandparent? Or maybe a corporate package is right for you to build connection across your workforce and add value to your clients. Visit audiolife.io today to learn more. Our listeners will get 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. AudioLife, where memories find their voice.
Tell us, I think you reference this in your chapter. I think this is relevant to what you're describing for leaders. So tell us, what is the AI mindset?
What is the AI mindset for the leaders that I typically think about? What should it be, or what is it today? And I just want to make that distinction.
What does it mean? So my thinking is, when people hear, and it probably is the leaders you're talking to. So when people hear, okay, what you need to do as a leader is you need to adopt the AI mindset. What is that? What is the AI mindset? What does that mean? How do they get their head there?
How do they get their head there? So I'm sorry, I'm drilling down on this because with the leaders that I talk to, if someone were to say, like you did, ask me the question, what's their AI mindset today? It is a lot of what you and I have talked about already, which is, it's a tool, and it's a tool for productivity. And here's two places we're using it. We have Microsoft Copilot, or we use ChatGPT, and some people are doing some really cool emails that they are a lot more articulate than they used to be. That is, and I'm not trying to take away from leaders, not all leaders. I mean, some people are experts in this, no doubt. But generally speaking, senior leaders who are maybe a little past having learned this in school or the latest professional development course view it as, now I get it, productivity tool, we're going to use it certainly to say we do and to keep our employees happy. But that isn't really what we're referring to, I think, collectively when we refer to what should the AI mindset be, which goes back a little further to the chapter I did contribute, fortunately, to that book, which is you need to look at it beyond that, right? That it can and is absolutely going to completely impact your organization, regardless of industry, like regardless of size, magnitude, otherwise, does it matter? So your mindset has to be here to stay, more nuanced than I as the leader probably think today, and that's okay. I can become a little deeper in it, but also make sure I surround myself with people who are looking at that as part of what's going to create our business model, whether it's just the operational side, or as we also referenced before, creating an opportunity for us to be different from the next organization in the same industry. So the mindset has to be, at least from where I sit, it is absolutely a part of the fabric now. So best to leverage it to your advantage. And in many cases, the advantage is create the table stakes, which allows your people to use their judgment, which creates that advantage we referred to.
Yes.
So I don't quite want to get into it. View it as a friend, because it's still scary for all of us in terms of what this tech can do, but certainly embrace it as it's not a fad. Right. And I think we all appreciate that it is absolutely integrated and should be integrated into all conversations. At least, hey, have we thought about how this could be done differently? It's called differently today, but as you and I just talked about, in 24 months, it's probably not going to be the word we use, differently, because there'll be enough of at least of our competitors doing that we're going to feel like we're coming from behind. AI mindset is about, just in my opinion, just integrating this into your strategic thought process, which also then, by direct extension, I would never want to leave culture out. But if you have that inherently as your mindset, you're going to attract the resources that are, we'll call it up and coming, because there's no way, almost to a person, they're going to be attracted to an organization that's looking at it simply as a productivity tool. Guaranteed, because they're looking at it saying, this is grassroots stuff that we need to be doing. And what do you mean I have to do this analysis on my own? Or what do you mean I have to look that up through 4 different document sets? Those are the simple things, but their expectations are that it's there. So your mindset had better be, I'm not going to quite say AI first, because there's lots of things for leaders to think about, but it's right up there. I would argue now more so than it's ever been, as someone who's been around technology for, I don't want to say how many years, because it'll completely date me.
Okay.
But let's just say I think I remember punch cards. So we really need to view this as something entirely different, even in the last 36 months. And that's saying something, right? Because technology, we've always known about the laws that are out there, their technology and processing speed doubles and all those great laws that one could quote. But it's got to the point now where it's not just computing power, it's impact. And that's the AI piece that I think is best represented mindset wise. If you have your head around that it's the fabric, then I think all leaders will be in a much better position and not quite as fearful.
So that's excellent. So yeah, what I wanted to hear is what should the AI mindset be? And I really appreciate that you contrasted it with what it is today for many people. It might just be a tool. It might be checking, it might be the things that you mentioned, and it shouldn't be, right? What should it be? And you've given us a lot to think about. You've given us some practical, some concrete examples that we should be taking into our work, that we should be looking forward. I think it's so important to keep referencing that 24 months ago, how different things look than they look today. You talk a lot in your chapter about fear and the fact that we shouldn't fear, that we need to get past that fear in order to have the progress that we need to. And you've already talked about how you said it in other words, but you're going to be left behind. This is going to level the playing ground, the playing field. You're going to be left behind. With all of that in mind, I want to look forward. You're tackling what people are dealing with today and what has been moving rapidly for the last, let's call it 24 months. I want to look forward. So we're kind of getting into a, ideal state. If you could send a message to future generations about how we handled AI, what would it be? Let's go forward.
How we handled as in past tense?
How we handled AI. Yeah. So let's go forward a couple generations. Let's go back and say, in that ideal case that we know we're trying to build right now, and we might be facing resistance, or it might be happening faster than we can keep up with.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question, and I have a little smile on my face. I'm a big movie buff, right? So when we look back 20 years in some of these movies, we're scratching our heads going, why was that even a debate? Or why was that even a consideration? Or what were we thinking? And you're referencing some of that. I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to say anything different than what we haven't already talked about, but maybe with a different bow, right? Is certainly I've said, I think if the fear is of technology displacing humans, that is not a great place to be, right? And I'm not saying you have to be necessarily leading edge all the time, but bleeding edge is going to matter because responsiveness and adoption is different. And in 2 years or if you want to go a generation ahead, this is going to be a tough concept for them to get. They're going, well, of course, everything he's saying is very blah, blah, blah. Of course, that makes sense. Yeah. But that's what I think the difference is they're going to look back and they're going to say, why didn't you go faster? I think what I would say to them was, look, at that time, similarly like I did with the previous answer, is here's what people were thinking. Here's what they were concerned about. Yeah. And if you were in the moment, maybe you'd feel that, but you don't now. And you're wondering why we weren't faster, because AI, as most people know, has been around arguably since 1950 something, right? If you can pick the year you want, at least as a concept. So why wouldn't we move faster? Why did it take, if you consider this the birth of true commercial grade AI, if you wanted to call it that, and it took 70 years to get there, if you use that window, they're just going to shake their head and saying, you guys you think too slow. They do not have the, and I'm going to put in quotes, advantage of knowing what we're living now, right? Yeah. Which is, hey, this is new to us. And so we tried, and I'm going to use past tense now because I'm talking to a generation or two from now. Look, we tried really hard to balance what the general mindset was, where we needed to go. We tried to make sure there wasn't an absolute fear and panic that it was all about the machines that the movies are telling us are going to run everything in a couple of years. And we tried to bring that into the business in a way that actually had the human element of passion and ethics and morals and all that, and that piece of it. I still think they're all going to look at, let's just say I'm doing this 2 generations from now, which I doubt. They would look at me like I'm crazy. But that is certainly what I would say is, look, it's a different time, or was a different time, which is today, than it is then. And I don't think you have to go 2 generations for that. My argument to some extent is, and I said this a little earlier in our discussion, is you're not going to attract any of the people who are coming out of school now if you're not looking at this as, and I don't want to say the speed of light, but as a given. It must be part of that conversation. Often at least with what I'll call the rudimentary tasks, as an absolute table stake. And we've used that reference before.
Yeah.
So generations 2 from now, boy, that would be wonderful. It's like someone asks you who you want to be in 10 years from now. I always love that in an interview question. No one does it anymore because I think they get 10 years from now, who can predict? AI-wise, I think you and I have probably said in different conversations, 12 months from now, this is going to look fundamentally different. And what was maybe the question is, what was the debate on which Gen AI tool to use? Maybe that'll be over.
Right.
And not to take away from your question, I just think that I think that explanation required is on leaders now. Just to say, why last year didn't you do this, right? We wrote you a memo.
Exactly.
I sent it to the CEO, and I'm a junior analyst, and I had the courage to do that and saying, hey, maybe you look at this, and it got ignored, and now look. That is the way I'm viewing it. And again, I go into talks around leadership and where the technology piece fits in. And you referenced this earlier. I don't go into it saying, embrace it or you're gone. But there is an undertone to suggest that if your intent is to continue to evolve and you've got some runway viewed in your leadership world, you absolutely need to do this from a success standpoint. And they can, I think, extend it from there, saying, I think success means he's suggesting maybe I won't be in this position if I don't do that. And there's a reality, and it's not unique to leaders. It just happens to be the area that I focus on. I think the questions I get asked from people that are trying to determine what leadership development course to do when they're kind of middle managers or just up and coming is, don't get caught up in necessarily the curriculum that's out there right now, because I do think even that's a little dated. You need to start embracing what you can see in front of you. And I've already talked to a lot of those things. And if you can balance that, you're going to be in an incredible differentiated position as a leader or a potential leader. And at the end of the day, I think most of us want to have a successful career. And generally speaking, people who aspire to be leaders want to be sitting at least very close to the top of the totem pole, at least the top of the echelon, if there is such a thing in organizations nowadays, and be able to make hard decisions. And to do that, you're going to have to embrace this today, not tomorrow, certainly not in 2 generations, but you're going to have to do it now.
Yeah, great answer. Great advice as well. I am going to give you a chance, although you've given us lots of advice, not only in this conversation, but in the book, but I will give you a chance for leaving some advice. But I appreciate that answer. It's, especially with how quickly things are moving, it's hard to pull ourselves out of this. It's hard to look forward even 12 months, as you said, but it's hard to pull ourselves out of this and say, okay, what's holding us back today? What seems like the biggest decisions today, the biggest deal breakers, the biggest considerations are a non-issue in a generation or 2. They're looking back saying, why did you even debate that? Why did you even, but I appreciate the reality of your answer and what you wrote in the AI revolution as well, for what is the reality of today. And the reality is AI has, it has had it's had winters, it's had springs. We're definitely in a spring right now. Things are moving quickly, but they're also moving faster than regulatory bodies can keep up. And there are ethical challenges that we've pulled out already. And if we're going to do this responsibly, and if we're going to do this well, we do have to be thoughtful and careful. There are, call it sci-fi concerns or real world concerns about AGI taking over and having too much control. These are real things that we need to get a handle on and understand and plan and take apart in. The regulatory bodies, again, there's just a lag there. I'm an early adopter, sometimes even an innovator. But as I was listening to you, I was struggling back and forth between the why can't we just get there already and the defensiveness that I feel living today, saying, well, we can't responsibly get there yet. We can go forward with an intention. We can go forward at a fair pace. We can experiment. We can iterate. But we do have that very important, which you brought up earlier, the human judgment piece, that responsibility, accountability, ethical piece that we are just trying to catch up on right now. But again, as the interviewer, I get to throw that out the window, ask you the question and push you to think past that and say, well, that's not an issue in 20 years or 10 years or however far in the forward in the future we want to look. So I appreciate all of that. I do want to ask you just a couple questions as we're wrapping up. Is there anything that you wrestled with or debated as you were, once you put something in writing, once it's published, it's already dated. Is there anything that you wrestled with or that you debated? Either you did put it in or you didn't, or it just was something you knew that you weren't ready to put down on paper yet?
Yeah, and the answer to that, unfortunately, is a bit repetitive, but it was what I was saying before. I certainly wrestled with being significantly more aggressive in the messaging, back to get on it or get out. It's not quite my personality, though I think most people that have worked with me know that I can be pretty pointed when it's time to be pointed. That is the piece for sure, that whether it was in the chapter for the book that you and I were both part of, or even my own writing, is should I be more to the point on this? Because to your reference, in a year from now, people are going to look going, boy, he certainly beat around the bush to get to that point, because that's where I think it's going to go. The luxury is I think you can update some of this thinking as people are maybe a little more ready to embrace that reality. I don't want to do it as a laggard. I've made this reference before. I will certainly be the first in many cases to say something. I'm not going to say controversial, but when you have some experience you can draw upon that includes failures as well as successes, which I do, you're able to say here, real life experience, not just examples that are in the marketplace, that waiting, sometimes that paralysis can absolutely harm you as a leader. Yeah. Right. So in writing, I would tell you in my thought leadership articles, I'm probably more aggressive than in a book that's published that is going to be read by all kinds of different people, which is fantastic because that's the intended audience, right? I do think if and when and as I am talking to specific groups, I tend to get a lot more specific around. If we're taking it off the record, I'll often say, here's what I think you need to do. And they can decide whether or not my advice is worth it or not, but at least they're going to hear it very pointedly, which I think in writings, you're also trying to match the cadence and really the style of everyone else when you co-author, right? You just can't be out there going, here's this brash individual saying it's this way. And the whole point of that kind of compilation is to get multiple perspectives, which is incredibly healthy. I don't, as you didn't intentionally point out, but I didn't spend a ton of time on the ethical piece, even though I completely believe that is foundational. But there's other people that can talk to that with more credibility, more experience than I can. Suffice it to say, not trying to circle back to that, I do think it's a big concern that depends where you are in the world. Your government probably has a different perspective than the next government on how this has to be run. And that is going to be a massive challenge. If we are going to try to govern it, internationally governing it is going to be, I won't say impossible, but it's going to be a very difficult task. And, if it's regional, then how does that work in a globalized world? So anyways, back to the question you asked me, is I do think writing allows you to be a little more, for lack of a better phrase, flowery, when you're going to have the opportunity, once you know specifically who your audience is that you're talking to at any given time, to be a little more pointed and direct. One other thing I would tell you, and it's a little off script, and my apologies for that, because I've got asked this question a bunch of late by many of my colleagues saying, why did you choose to write now? And they all, with a half smirk, saying, well, let me get this straight. You're, for instance, contributing to a book on AI. Did you have AI write your chapter? Right? Because a lot of people, they look at their kids who have been leveraging a lot of that to write content. I say it's fascinating because what I did do, which maybe doubled the time to do this, is I wrote what I wanted to write. And then I challenged the tool that I was using. I said, okay, I'm going to give you some principles and you write the way you would write it. And there was some significant differences. And for me to say better or worse, of course, I'm going to say mine was better. At least I hope it is. But it's very compelling what a machine can write based on everything else that's out there from a thought leadership perspective. But it still comes down to, if I'm true to my word, if it's about our own individual judgment and that's the value we bring to any given environment, your writing had better reflect that. Right? And that's, I don't think that's advice, but I am saying to a lot of people now are coming to me going, do you think I could write a book in a month now because I have the advantage of it? I said, depends what you're writing about. If you're writing fiction, maybe. But if you're trying to base it on, here's where I'm trying to make a distinction between where experience can actually add some value, then probably not. And that goes back to where I think we are going to have a distinct advantage for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, great point, great advice. I also like the distinction between, the AI revolution is bringing together 34 voices with different domains, different expertise for probably a more general audience than who you're speaking to maybe on a day-to-day in your work, right? It's a really, really good overview. And then what you're doing maybe on this podcast, certainly in some of your companion books and some of your other thought leadership is getting much more specific, and in your daily, consulting and coaching as well, is getting just more specific into people's role. So I appreciate all of that. What else? I told you I'd give you a chance to come back with advice. You've given us a lot, so I don't want to do that, ask you something you've already answered thing again, but I do want to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to share that I haven't asked you about, including advice that you'd like to leave for our listeners.
Yeah, and I will just say your segues, intentional or otherwise, you're obviously very good at this, have been perfect, because where I was going with that last piece of advice is literally building off what you just said about our co-authored book, is that it's all of interest, right? You can read that book and say, hey, this is interesting, but I wish it went a little deeper, or I wish it was a little more applicable. And that's where I'm going with that. Hence the reason I did what I did with my book series is, hey, I think foundational knowledge is an absolute, it's a starter, it's a table stake, but you need to, and this is the advice, is you need to find sources that make it applicable to you, or you will not do anything with it. So it doesn't matter where you are in your career or the profession you're in. Start somewhere and get that basis and maybe even challenge it, but also appreciate, to your point, that it was written with multiple lenses and stakeholders in mind, likely, until you get into those that specialize in things that are specific to you. And, my common reference here, I work with boards, and boards will tell you the very first thing comes out of their mouth is saying, we don't do what executives do, so please don't use that reference with us. It makes sense to some extent, but that doesn't mean it's a pass to say we're all oversight and we're not expected to really have that depth. That's what the organization that we govern has. Not true anymore. And that's an example, but you and I could use dozens of those, right? Anyone who read any one of those chapters in the book that you and I were a part of is going to go, boy, I wish this went one step further. And I wish this one chapter author would write a book on their own and start helping me understand a little bit more about how this relates to me. Because at the end of the day, we're all about us, and we should be. That's what makes us human, right? Is to say, what's going to add value to my pursuits, my interests, my passions, and maybe my specific circumstance, is someone who can speak that language. And sometimes you'll get it written perfect for you. And sometimes you're just going to have to engage in, I would even argue, conversations like this, where you're talking to another expert like I'm talking to you, and I could get something, once you knew my background, that is a lot more pointed from you, because you have that context. And I think it's the context piece. That's the advice, not to get too overblown, is you can find nowadays the sources that are most applicable, or at least as close as possible, to your particular challenge, circumstance, opportunity, call it what you want, and look for that once you have a foundational understanding. Because the idea here, we could have some fun. I'm a parent. My children are growing up, but you know what it's like. Everyone wants to be famous or notorious for a day, it seems nowadays. It's not about just saying the opposite so you can have a voice. At some point, you're going to have to embrace it and use it for your own advantage, whatever your aspirations are. So don't always be looking for what's wrong. Try to find the environments that are, especially with AI. There's so many ways to use this positively for personal or professional means. Find that and select, and make some decisions that aren't, hey, I think I'm going to paralyze myself for 2 years and study this, because you will have missed whatever you're studying this year will be likely out of date in 6 months, including, I hate to say it, our book, but at least we're taking a stance to say that's why it's important, I believe, that these things are consumed as close to in the moment as possible, because no one is suggesting that these concepts are going to hold a test of time like they used to. You write certain books, I won't name them, that still are probably applicable.
It is, again, when we look at future generations, it is telling them what was important today. It's telling them what we're facing today, the best advice we have today, the best tools that we've, for those that got into tools, the best way that we can use tools today. I want to, we're wrapping up. You've been very generous with your time. I want to ask you one fun question, because we've focused a lot on work. We've focused a lot on the future. What's one of your favorite uses of any AI tool in your personal life?
Well, I mean, I think I do as much as the next person on the fastest answers possible. I used to be a huge trivia buff. And it was an
Mm.
advantage for me to have some of that in my head, which is no longer an advantage because by the time I can spew it out, my kids or someone else has the answer to that. But
Yeah.
certainly, I use it for curation like many people do personally, right? So music lists, those kind of things. I mean,
Yep.
and movie lists. I mentioned before I was a movie buff. So are those powerful uses of it? Maybe by someone's standards, no. But for me, who used to spend a lot of time trying to organize all this
Yeah.
thinking, and I prize, like most people do, my personal time, it's spectacular and fun. Because when my wife and I come home and debate what movie we're going to watch, we can go to, okay, let's just plug in what mood we're in, literally mood, not ask for a genre. And it goes, here's 4 based. And you know what? It's getting really good at it.
Yes.
But to the point where and the best part is both of us almost have to agree, right? In the sense that, well, we're the ones that kind of trained it to do this, so let's just go with it. So anyways, that's that piece. That's the fun aspect. I don't want to, and nor did you intend to, I'm sure we don't want to trivialize it at all, but it can be used everywhere. I think it reinforces the point we were making. Not to circle back to the business side, but I just think there's a lot more hit and miss on the business side than there's in the personal side. Again, all ethics considered. And social media is just an animal you and I won't go into today, but there'll be another time for that.
Fair
and
enough.
Probably another guest for you to do that with.
No, Tom, that's been wonderful. And, as we talk about integrating AI into the AI mindset into our work, we can't ignore integrating it just into different aspects of our life. As we talk about the fear of AI, maybe at home is a low stakes way of playing around. But I have to agree with you. I'm the kind of person that would have spent as long as an hour narrowing down and picking what I was going to watch instead of just getting those 4 or 5. Like, I love those 4 or 5 options. You try it out, low risk if you don't like it, but they are really good these days. So I think it's a great practical example. Tom, I've had such a pleasure talking to you. How can people learn more about your work or connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest answer to that, beyond the book that you've shown, which I think is kind of the premise of what we've been talking about, very AI centric, and even when it comes to leadership, where I fall on all of this is back to the kind of more general leadership side of things, which is obviously technology infused, but also related to those skills which are not going to go away, which I clearly was referencing will remain important. The things that humans can do that I don't think machines will ever, or certainly in the near future, be able to do. So The Contemporary Leader is the book I wrote. It's thecontemporaryleader.com, not very original to go to a landing page. I will say this much, and this isn't just for me to say and take away the cliches. I'm not really trying to drive book sales by having these kind of conversations. I hope it resonates with people. It's just about available on audiobook because most of us are really interested in doing things faster. Although audiobooks tend to be long, I like the abridged versions. But I will continue to write in this space for the remainder of what I do, because it has, I think I referenced this right off the beginning, between technology, strategy, and leadership, it's always been of interest to me. And with what's happening now in the world, it just becomes, at least in my tiny world, it becomes so incredibly or exponentially more interesting just to talk about it, saying, well, what does this mean to the leader who was just let go and they're 45 years old and they're worried about being left behind? And sure, I mean, this has to be part of that conversation in terms of where they go with, what we spend 8, 12, 16 hours a day doing, depending on who you are. And it's there's no hiding from that. Even if your philosophy is work to live, which mine is, not live to work so much, better be doing what you're enjoying. And to enjoy it, you're going to have to put yourself in a position where you're able to add value based on the way the world is today. Back to your earlier point, not yesterday, not even 2 years ago. And maybe not getting too carried away saying you can predict 2 years in the future, because I can't. And I'm not sure there are too many people that can. Nope, not anymore.
Wonderful. So we can find Tom at thecontemporaryleader.com. You can read his chapter in his most recent publication, The AI Revolution, which I do highly recommend. But to Tom's point, there's also lots of free content out there. We're putting this podcast out just to give you some of the highlights that you could get in that book. You can find Tom on LinkedIn. And again, I want to thank you for...
Carrie, thank you.
Yeah, you've been generous with your time, your advice, your expertise. I also want to thank everybody out there listening to us. It's been another episode of AudioLife AudioLife Memoirs, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. I hope you enjoyed the show. I've been your host today, Carrie Purcell. And again, I've been joined by Tom Mawhinney, author of the top new release and best-selling book, The AI Revolution, Thriving Within Civilization's Next Big Disruption. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to rate our show and subscribe so you never miss an episode, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another one. Thanks, everyone.
If you like what you heard today, consider recording your own AudioLife private podcast or giving one to a loved one for a unique and memorable gift. Today, AudioLife listeners will receive 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. Also, remember to rate our show and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.